Hello, I'd like to welcome you to the Our Revolution Helena TV program here on Helena Civic TV. My name is Frank Kromkowski. I'm one of the members of Our Revolution Helena. We've been an organization since May of 2015 when we got founded as Helena for Bernie Sanders to help him win the primary election here in Montana, which he did very handily. And since that time we continued, and we have continued on a weekly and a monthly basis to hold events and work on important issues such as dark money in politics, voter registration, gun violence, and a variety of issues that people care about, and all are related to our mission in Our Revolution Helena, which is to promote reclamation of our genuine democracy in the United States, which has been under attack in so many ways. So today, for our 13th program in the series, lucky number 13, we have two guests. One is Kimberley Reed, who is a film director originally from Helena, who has produced a film called Dark Money, which is going to be shown starting August 10th here in Helena and will run through August 16th at the Motl. And our other guest is Jonathan Motl, who is in the film and is a former commissioner of political practices in Montana. So I want to welcome both of you and thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Well, so Kim, I'd like to ask you about this film and what you'd like people to know about it, and then maybe something important about what you learned or what you want people to know about why you made this film.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people who heard about the Citizens United decision that came down from the U.S. Supreme Court in 2010. I had a lot of questions. It didn't make a lot of sense at first blush, and the arguments in Citizens United were really about freedom of speech, First Amendment stuff. And as a filmmaker, that's very important to me. I use the First Amendment every day, right? So I was wondering about how to square that circle. Had a lot of questions, didn't really know what to do with those questions that I had, and kind of listened to everybody talking about Citizens United and the impact of it for a couple years until 2012, when the case that Montana had that was challenging Citizens United went to the U.S. Supreme Court as well. And at that point I realized, we could make a movie about this and wrap it around people, and have real people going through all of this campaign finance stuff, and not just all of the abstractions and numbers and things that are frankly a little hard to follow and not the most cinematic thing on the face of the earth. So in following that, initially when Citizens United came out, a lot of people were worried about just the kind of unlimited nature of the money. And what I was seeing happening right off the bat in Montana was that folks were not just paying attention to the fact that the money was unlimited, but that it was anonymous. And I think as somebody who grew up in Montana and had some of the kind of, when you go to grade school hearing about the Copper Kings and you see some of the impacts that, the Copper Kings left us, it's easy to be skeptical of corporate money in politics, especially when it's anonymous. And I think I just kind of saw trouble brewing, a drama that was developing in my home state. So that's really what got me interested. And the main thing that I would say, to answer your question very directly, is that the main thing I learned was that it really is that anonymous money that I think is very harmful, and not just the unlimited nature of the money. I was reading a story yesterday in OpenSecrets.org, which tracks a lot of money in politics, and they were saying that for the first time, dark money spending is eclipsing super PAC spending. So you could kind of see those trend lines since I've been working on this film since 2012. And here we are, where dark money and anonymous spending is the majority of the spending.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, I know that you've cared about this issue quite a while, and were involved directly in some court cases and investigations of allegations about dark money and unreported contributions to campaigns in Montana in some very famous cases. What was your involvement in this movie and in some of the issues that this movie is all about?
Well, I was part of, like you, part of the citizens that were working on campaign finance for decades in Montana, but I became Montana's Commissioner of Political Practices in May of 2013 and met Kim, who was working on her movie shortly after that. And I think the distinction that I hope Montanans take from this movie, it's a very good movie, is this. That is that we didn't just go away when Citizens United struck down one of our laws that was passed by initiative in 1912, but we actually reacted to it. We enforced the laws that we had, and you'll see some of that enforcement in the movie if you go to the movie. And in addition, we passed a new law. We passed the Disclose Act in 2015 that has disclosed a lot of the money. So while dark money has risen nationally, it actually is under substantial control here in Montana, and that's what makes Kim's film so good. It frames what is, and it frames what can be. And I think there's hope in it for that reason.
And I do have to say that one of the main reasons that we know how things can be is because of Jonathan Motl and the enforcement that he was able to accomplish at the Commission of Political Practices. That, you know, as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, it's not often that you get to celebrate everyday heroes who do really important work, like, you know, campaign finance enforcement. That's probably not like a super common superhero description for Hollywood films, is like campaign finance enforcement. But when I saw what Jonathan and Jamie, the staff attorney at COP, and those folks, the great team of people, very small and dedicated team of people, when I saw what they were doing, it was a very inspiring story to be able to celebrate what these folks are doing just on day to day.
So it's my understanding, Jonathan, that Montana's laws, as far as campaign finance, dating back to 1912 and even currently, are some of the best laws in the country concerning campaign financing. But that dark money is probably going to ruin a lot of possibly good things in other states and maybe in our state. But is there a chance to take heart from the good things that did happen in Montana, and not only uncover certain people's unreported contributions and make them report and pay a fine and so forth? Are there other things that are happening that lead you to be hopeful, or is it pretty much that we have to live under the cloud of Citizens United and do the best we can here in Montana while the rest of the country goes downhill?
Well, I would say this. So we passed very good campaign finance laws, some of which still exist in 1912 by Citizen Initiative. That's 106 years ago. Mm-hmm. And we're still here today. And we still have the same philosophy, I think, which is that community matters. Sure, we're a state that we're individualistic in orientation, and we're very individualistic in some of the things that we pursue, but we still believe in community and in the way that community creates governance. And yeah, I'm real hopeful, because take, for example, what Citizens United did. It struck down the portion of the 1912 law that said corporations cannot spend corporate money to advertise independently in elections. So that's gone. Montana had that from 1912, but that's gone as of the Citizens. But it left in place the prohibition on direct corporate contributions to candidates. That's still here to this day in Montana. A lot of states don't have that. Mm-hmm. We are a remarkable state where regardless of political philosophy, Republican, Democrat, and I didn't include Libertarian in that because they're not in there, but Republican, traditional Republican, and Democrats unite when it comes to a sense of community and fair elections.
And the basic architecture of the film is to kind of show how campaign finance enforcement regulations are broken in other states and are broken at the federal level, but look at what's going on in Montana. Isn't that an inspiring example? And that has been the reception of the film from our kind of birth at the Sundance Film Festival and a bunch of festivals since then, and the theatrical release that we've been doing. People are very inspired to hear that example.
That's what I've been reading in many of the reviews that I've looked at about the film as it's being shown here and there. This is Helena, August 10th is Helena's premiere, but it's not the Montana premiere. That was back in February, right, of this year in Missoula.
Yeah, we're at the Big Sky Documentary Film Festival.
And so after the film is then going through release in theaters, it will be on public television, public PBS. Is that right?
Yeah, the basic schedule is we're going to, we've been doing festivals, and then the next step is to go out into theaters. So we've been opening in theaters for about the last month, started in New York. We'll continue that throughout the summer, and then there will be a broadcast in October in the run-up to the election. So it'll be on PBS. There's a documentary strand called POV. Usually on Monday nights, not always on Monday nights, so just check your local listings, as they say.
Yeah, POV is a very interesting series that I watch pretty regularly. See all kinds of beautiful stories about very important and moving issues. I know that one of the things I've learned about Montana is that we have some investigative reporters like John S. Adams from the Montana Free Press, who are featured in the movie as well. And I just wonder if you might say a few things about investigative reporters and some of the people in the press who were helpful to you in the course of learning what you learned about Montana and dark money.
Yeah, if you have some of the regulations in place, which we've been talking about, the actual laws on the books, and if you have aggressive enforcement, like Jonathan was able to do at the Commissioner of Political Practices, another component to have, I would argue, a healthy democracy is a strong watchdog press who can take some of this campaign finance data, look at it, and just kind of see when things are off, see when the source of spending is not being disclosed, watching for situations where there's a vested interest for this type of spending that's going into politics, especially if it's anonymous. Because you can bet that if the money is anonymous, there's probably a pretty good reason that it's there. And Montana has also had a very strong tradition of journalists who follow campaign finance stories, who write about them. When I was working on this film initially, I would travel around and tell different campaign finance people that, like, you guys, we routinely have stories on the front page of all the newspapers across the state, above the fold, and it's almost like they didn't believe me that people could pay attention so much. But when you do, that really it leads to a very well-informed electorate that can make decisions about corruption based on where the money is going and our ability to follow the money. So you need a strong watchdog press to do that. And Chuck Johnson has been writing about these issues for lead newspapers, as well as Mike Dennison. I connected with John S. Adams, who was writing for the Great Falls Tribune at the time. And one of the things that our film documents is not only kind of this storyline about campaign finance and where money in politics is going, but also what's happening to the press that's trying to cover it. And I won't get into too many spoiler alerts, but all sorts of stuff happens to John on a personal level that makes it very difficult for him to continue following this thread. And he becomes just kind of emblematic of the kind of consolidation and reshaping of economics that the entire newspaper industry is going through. And so that is something that we follow with John as kind of our guide through this world. It was all based on kind of follow the money is a phrase that you hear, and we learned that from All the President's Men. And that was a film that was very inspiring in terms of its structure. If you kind of follow through the eyes of a reporter, it's very mysterious.
So, Jonathan, you're in the film and you've seen the film. Was there something that surprised you about what you saw and learned in the course of looking at this film, or in the course of cooperating with Kim and Josh, John Adams, and others?
Well, it didn't surprise me, but I absolutely loved the way in which there was such an array of Montanans who were willing to speak out on dark money, Republicans, Democrats, and I've always felt that that was the case. But when you're in the job I was in, you didn't, sometimes it felt pretty lonely, and I was just delighted to see the number of people who are so articulate and passionate, and we look good. Montana looks good. Our political leaders look good. Our people look good. Our ability to act as a community looks good. But I have to say that as good as that looks, we all know in Montana that it's a thin thread. We cannot relax. We have to keep on this issue, ever vigilant, because the force of money is it's just pressure. It's pushing all of the time, and we have to keep innovating and keep pushing back.
I know a lot of the things that I like to follow in the legislature are things like health care for everyone, and that seems to be a very distant dream. But at least in the 2015 Montana legislature, Medicaid expansion was passed. Now, the reality was it passed by one vote. And so the struggles for really basic things are still very, very difficult. And it may be that there are lots of people who would not like to see all these powerful forces, economic forces, telling us what to do. But in lots of cases, they still are at it and are still pushing to have their viewpoint established. One of the current examples is the Healthy Montana Initiative, which is an attempt to make sure that the Medicaid expansion, which passed by one vote in 2015 and sunsets at the end of this year, would be continued.
Okay, but that's not the way I describe that initiative.
Okay.
Here's the way I describe
All right.
it. That is a tobacco tax initiative that raises a tax on tobacco, and in so doing, lessens the amount of Montanans who are going to be smoking. It relieves Montanans of a great financial responsibility because there's going to be fewer people in the long run who come in with diseases. Now, it's true that the money funds Medicaid, but that is a health initiative. It is aimed, it includes e-cigarettes, so it, for the first time, targets the increased use of electronic smoking among teenagers. It is a wonderful, basic economic hit for Montanans. You should be for it. Whether you're for Medicaid or against Medicaid, that one vote margin doesn't matter. You should be for it because it's going to better the health of Montanans and lessen your pocketbook in the long run. That's the way I would describe that one. It is something that every Montanan should be for, and I hope it passes with a 90, well, there's 17% of us who smoke, so it'll probably pass, hopefully 83 to.
It's always hard to predict what's going to happen before an election, but we had Ella Smith from the Healthy Montana Initiative as one of our guests a couple of weeks ago, before they managed to get the signatures to put that on the ballot, and reiterated some of those same points. But now some large financial interests who are in the tobacco industry are trying to push against that initiative.
And so what they're going to say is it's a huge tax increase. And the tax increase is going to, and they'll ignore all of the fact that it's actually a money-saving thing. So anyway, that's, but it's a very good, it's a very good initiative.
So Kim, we just have another minute or so left. Is there anything else you want to add to the discussion here about the issues of dark money and your movie that you'd like to share with us?
I just kind of to reiterate what I was saying about having a chance to celebrate these kind of everyday heroes who are just doing their job as campaign finance regulators or lawyers within COP, journalists like we were talking about with John S. Adams. But this whole story could not have been possible if it weren't for one woman, Deborah Bonagofsky, who was running for office and got kind of attacked by a bunch of this kind of familiar dark money attack that happens right before the election. She saw that something was off, and she just started digging to find out what was underneath it. And without that effort, we would not wouldn't have made the film. We wouldn't have probably passed legislation that got passed. And you know, there's yet another example of somebody who's just doing the right thing and not seeking any sort of accolades for it, but just felt like she was doing what was right. And there are a lot of elected officials, most of whom are Republicans, working with, at the time, a Democratic governor to work on a bipartisan basis to pass something that there's, you know, as Jonathan was saying, a lot of bipartisan support for campaign finance reform. You know, I think we can all agree that, you know, elections should be fair, that folks that have inordinate money and influence should not be able to sway an entire electorate, and that's the fundamental sense of fairness that I think gets violated when you start running elections with a lot of anonymous money, especially when that anonymous money is unlimited. So hopefully the story of what happened in Montana will inspire people in a bunch of other states.
Let's hope that is the case.
I hope so.
That's the end of our conversation, but I want to tell our listeners that they are invited to our next Revolution Helena meeting, which is August 23rd. And our guest speaker that night is a person who's also featured in the film. That's retired Justice Jim Nelson, former Justice of the Montana Supreme Court, who will be going into more depth on Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision, its threat to democracy, and also his concerns about the threats to fascism in the United States, which he articulated a bit in his interview with me just a couple of days ago. And so August 23rd, 7 p.m. at Plymouth Congregational Church up at corner of Oaks and Winnie. Thank you very much for watching today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.